Welcome to Discovering. There's a lot of reasons to consider planting trees, scenic appeal, and of course, wildlife habitat enhancement. We'll take a look at the ongoing results of a deer habitat improvement grant and what it means for wildlife.
We've been successful with these grants for at least 3 or 4 years now.
Then the UP inventor who proves there's more than one way to plant a nut.
If you want to plant oak trees, I've developed a tool that I think would really assist any landowner or people that have food plots.
Sit back and relax. It's Monday night and time for Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
Or forest, teeming with plant and animal life. They support thousands of jobs, enhance the quality of our air and water. We count on them for energy. They contribute billions of dollars to Michigan's economy each year. They provide countless outdoor recreation opportunities. We hunt there, we fish there, hike, bike, camp, ride. Here in the UP, the forest is part of our lives every day. Of the Upper Peninsula's 10.5 million acres, 8.8 million, or 84% of it, is covered by forest. It's not hard to conclude that we need to take care of it, both for us humans and for the wildlife that occupies it. Forest management can take many forms. Here's a look at a project taking place in a UP deer wintering complex area. This project is sponsored by Boise Knot Gobblers, the Marquette County Conservation District, the DNR, UP Whitetails, and UP Whitetails of Marquette County, and is being funded in part by a deer habitat improvement grant provided by the Michigan DNR Wildlife Division.
Well, we've been interested in helping wildlife ever since we've owned the property. I've done different kinds of food plots over the years, and I've done small timber harvest in a plantation we had, and we also cut our own firewood out of the maple grove. I was contacted by Matt Watkes in the winter about a grant with Deer Habitat Improvement Program, and he wanted to plant some conifers on our property because we're part of the deer wintering complex. And so we met with him, and he walked the property with us and decided it would be best to do planting in amongst our maple woods to give kind of an understory for the deer. The Marquette County Conservation District was successfully awarded a Deer Habitat Improvement Partnership Initiative grant. These grants come through the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and we've been successful with these grants for at least 3 or 4 years now. And we keep similar ideas in mind, but we kind of change things up a little bit. The goal here is to underplant these recently thinned hardwood stands with conifers and also with some oaks. So we're trying to introduce a little bit of a conifer component for cover, for the wildlife, and also the oaks, like I mentioned, for a food source in the future. These stands are lacking that component right now. That's why we're putting it in here, obviously. The crew that's here today is part of Timberland Forestry, and they are based in Rumley, Michigan, out of the Evergreen Nursery office there in Rumley. They're great local contractors that grow a lot of our seedlings for our plant sales as well. They grow containerized seedlings and full potted large size trees too.
Well, the main thing that we're doing in UP throughout is growing forestry, native seedlings, all the pines, all the spruces, hardwoods, birches, yellow, white birches, red and white oak, bur oaks, and a large variety of native shrubs for wildlife habitat. That's the nursery end. The service end involves putting those same seedlings back into the ground in either production environments as a plantation or in deer habitat, wildlife habitat.
So this project actually started out on the neighboring parcel. I visited that parcel last year. It's a large family hunt club, and they wanted to discuss a little bit of aspen cutting in their resource, but more of a patch cutting to introduce different age classes into their aspen stand. That can be the ideal habitat, as if you have 3 or 4 different age classes of aspen on your property. But their project was a little bit of a smaller volume project, so I knew it was going to be a challenge to get a logger interested. But then I met with these landowners this spring, came out and toured their woods and saw their large aspen component as well, which basically stretched right across the property boundary to the neighbors.
We had some areas we needed to harvest because of the qualified forest program, and so he put us in touch with Kerry Logging, who was going to harvest some of our neighbors' property.
I asked a few loggers as per my program and referred the work out. Kerry Logging jumped on this project, and they are the ones that undertook this cutting. They wanted to start on this side though because it was a little bit of higher ground, and we've had a fairly dry summer, so it's not very sloppy in here right now. As they finish this project and it gets a little bit colder, they're going to move into the neighbors and complete that project as well.
That logging is going on right now, and they're going to harvest about 18 to 20 acres, and it's a mixture of big spruce and balsam and popples, and it's again to kind of get different age classes established to help the wildlife.
But the ultimate goal here is to not only harvest these forest products, but to also help create a lot of great wildlife habitat. Over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of young, fresh aspen sprouting in this stand to give a lot of browse material for the wildlife and a lot of cover as well. The loggers here are doing a fantastic job also, and it matches up with the landowners' goals of leaving these small islands of some trees, some small conifers, and some maples and basswood as well. So this is going to help with wildlife corridors and movement through this area too, I believe. We are also fairly close to the Escanaba River and inside one of the mapped winter deer yards as well. Part of the reason this is a mapped deer yard is because of the river corridor, but also because of the cedar components that we have. So there's a nice cedar stand just off to the edge of this aspen stand here. So there is some thermal cover in the wintertime, and we're creating that food source, which is a little bit lacking in this area. We really want a nice balance of winter cover and food sources for the wildlife. And that's what we're accomplishing here, as well as a large-scale planting project that we're undertaking today as well in other parts of this property. We are putting in 1,000 trees here today. We have 300 white pine, 300 red pine, 300 white spruce, and 100 red oak. White pine is especially beneficial for wildlife habitat because it has those large spreading branches when it is mature, and it does intercept a lot of snowfall, similar to hemlock and cedars when we hear about winter deer yards. The red pine component when it's young and the white spruce component when they're young, again, provide a little bit of cover and wildlife corridors for the animals to move around. The crew here is looking for mostly gaps in the canopy to fill in these trees so they get some sunlight, but we are also kind of spacing the trees out in about a 10-foot by 10-foot spacing where applicable, and we're kind of staying underneath this hardwood forest like I mentioned. There is some nice wildlife fields off to our east, active logging down to our south, as well as cedar stands and other conifer components. The landowner's boundary is just off to our west at their gate, and off to the north this way, we definitely transition into more of a conifer component that way. So we're sticking right under this hardwood stand on either side of this landowner's driveway here.
This was an area of the spruce plantation that was about 60 years old, and it was on our schedule to have it harvested, and then the spruce budworm got in it. And so we were lucky enough to catch up with Dave LaFleur, who was working in the state land next to us, and he swung over here in February of 2016 and harvested this along with the state land. And he tried to cut a few popples on the outside of the stand of spruces, and that's what you see mostly here is, aspen coming in here, a lot of raspberries, and it hadn't even been 3 years yet since he cut it. So we're pleased with the regeneration of this too. And you see he left some seed trees in the background too, so we will get hopefully some spruces coming in, and a few maples are in there. He left a few snags for the woodpeckers. He left the white pines, and should be a nice mix once it finally gets established.
These 3 landowners we're working with today have been clients of this consulting forestry firm for several years. They are the ones who set up these timber sales to have these stands thinned, and they've been working on many other habitat improvements on these lands, including crabapple tree plantings, a lot of other oak plantings, wildlife food plots. There's some nice grapevines growing here as well, and it's just an ideal parcel to get this done. We couldn't do it without the partners that we ask for in-kind donations from, and also time and effort. Some of those partners include UP Whitetails and UP Whitetails of Marquette County, also the Wild Turkey Federation's Badenoch Gobblers, of course the conservation districts, the Michigan DNR, and we're also working with clients of a local consulting forestry firm out of Escanaba, and they're called Upper Michigan Land Management and Wildlife Services.
UP Whitetails Association would like to thank Matt and Dean for working with the private landowners on projects such as what they're doing here today, reforestation, planting, and actual forest plans. The private landowner needs to get involved, realize what is available out there for them at hardly any cost at all, and will benefit the wildlife and themselves as far as the value of their property. So again, I would like to thank Matt with the conservation districts and Dean with the forestry projects for their time and effort. We've been working with them for years. We will continue to work with them and help the private landowners and work together to better our resource for today and tomorrow.
Anybody looking for any species that have been mentioned, or species that has been mentioned that we do grow, or we can always contract grow, anybody can come. We do retail, we do wholesale at the greenhouses in Rumley.
We have oak trees we planted over the years, crab apples, just anything we think would help deer and turkey and grouse, all the wildlife I'm interested in, hares, that kind of thing. So, trying to do what's right for the land and for whoever owns it after us.
Reforestation can range from planting partially grown trees all the way down to a seed. I met with UP inventor Lowell Larson, who proves there's more than one way to plant a nut.
If you want to plant oak trees, I've developed a tool that I think would really assist any landowner or people that have food plots. In 1990s, I had a forester come up and evaluate my land, and he asked me my objectives for my land. And my land, what we use our land for is primarily recreation, hunting, fishing, hiking, and just family get-together. And in his report, he noted that there was an absence of oak trees, which if I'm going to hunt, I have to have food sources for the animals. So I asked him then, how am I going to get oak trees growing when there's no oak trees around here? And he said, well, from the acorn would be the best. And I said, well, how do I plant them? He said, well, you'd have to dig a little hole about 1.5 inches and put an acorn in the hole and cover it up and hope the squirrels don't get them, and you can work from there. I said, I've got to crawl around in the woods planting acorns. I said, there has to be a better way. So that came to the point where I developed this prototype. This was my first prototype. After I planted many acorns, I put the acorn planter away. Hadn't worked with it for years. And along came Invent NMU. We're talking about patenting and ideas that people had. And so I brought it over there. And they thought it was a wonderful idea. And so we went on to working to develop what we call now the Squirrel. It took a lot of work, prototyping and so on, and patenting process, but they worked me through the process, and it worked out very well. I'm in the process of manufacturing now. It's a very simple process. It cores the ground, digs out the hole by pressing this down. As you push this down, it stops at the proper depth, and it pulls the core up into the tube. Now, I line it up. We drop the acorn into the guidance tube, and the acorn now just fell into the hole. And I push the plunger down to release the core back into the ground. Step it down to firm it up. And I move on to the next one. When I'm through planting, you would not know that I went through and put in hundreds of acorns. I do not disturb the ground. If you're trying to plant seedlings, you're tearing up the ground. This way, it's just a natural process, and hopefully the squirrel doesn't find it in the ground. I named my planter the Squirrel because I'm in competition with the squirrel. I gather my acorns in the fall of the year, of course, when the tree drops the nuts. Float test them to make sure that the nuts will grow. Those that float, we throw away. The nut has to sink. Those are your better acorns. And I package them in sandwich bags of about 50. If they do happen to go bad, you don't lose a lot of acorns at one time. Put them in the refrigerator in the garage at a temperature of 34 to 38 degrees. They should be in stratification or dormancy after they've fallen for about at least 3 months. I can plant them in the spring. I also can plant them in the late fall. 1st of November is excellent, just before the ground freezes. They will sprout in the spring. This is an excellent way to plant oak trees because it sends a taproot down deep into the ground. Here's 2 examples of white oak that sprouted during stratification. During the dormancy period, as they came out of the nut, they split open, they send out a taproot. Now this taproot gets quite long, and then the other part of the tree comes out of the ground. So this taproot is critical, and this is what makes planting seedlings difficult, because getting the taproot down into the ground far enough, and by planting a nut, that does it naturally. So that's 2 examples of nuts that have emerged. That's what's happening underground. Preparing to plant the nuts, if you're only going to plant a few, I cut the bag open, and I can use it for a carrying on my belt. I can put it on my belt, or you can get some kind of pouch to carry your emerging tree nuts. You can walk through an area. If there's not a lot of debris on the ground, I can walk through and put down 300 acorn nuts in an hour. I can walk through, and there's nothing that shows that I've been there, except the acorns are in the ground and ready to sprout. So we're not tearing up the environment with this method of planting. So there's a couple of different key growing times, fall and spring. People that plan on cutting their property, after the cut, normally, it's very difficult to get around with branches and so on the ground. If you can get the acorns in the ground, first part of November, they'll be in stratification or dormancy until spring. After the cut has been made during the winter, the acorns are already in the ground, and they're ready to go as soon as spring breaks. We can also plant them in the spring, early April, as soon as the snow leaves the ground, and you can start pushing the acorn planter into the ground. You can start planting the nuts as they start to merge from the nut. If there's a burnout area, excellent. You want to get into an open area where the sun will be beneficial. You don't want to get into too heavy a cover. Oak trees, like a lot of plants, they have to have the sunlight. So you want to be able to plant them in the open, burned out areas, cut over areas. They're all excellent. Or you can prep an area yourself. Take out some trees so the light gets to the ground. You can make your own little opening. You don't have to necessarily do a big cut. You can just open it up so the sun gets to the ground, and you can plant some acorns that way. It takes about 20 years to start producing acorns. There's a variety of wildlife that benefit from acorn production. It's an excellent food source for bear, deer, turkeys love them. I've seen blue jays fly by with them. Grouse will eat them. Ducks will eat them. It's not a quick fix, but it's a fix to help animals in the future. If we plan now, it will provide great food source for many wildlife that depend on acorns. By developing a squirrel and planting acorns to develop into nice oak trees in the future and a food source, I'm doing it primarily for the future. My grandson Isaac here, he I hope will benefit when I'm gone and the trees are producing the acorns.
A bit of UP news. Richard P. Smith has released another book. Great Michigan Deer Tales, Book 7, continues a series started back in 1994. The book includes detailed information about how, where, when, and by whom the state's biggest bucks were taken. You can find more information at richardpsmith.com. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next week right here on Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.